Hey guys, Ponce here, and today I thought I'd talk to you guys a little bit about my thoughts on Yasuo overall after playing him for a number of days on stream and trying to make videos of him and stuff. Yeah, so I have some fairly definitive opinions at this point, and I'm looking at some of my older gameplay videos, and I'm not exactly employing all these principles because, I was just learning him. So yeah, I thought I'd talk about that a little bit. Maybe people find that informative and or interesting. But in any case, let's get the basics out of the way. I'm sure most of you guys realize this, but I'm still getting a lot of questions in regard to that. But he is definitely a mid laner. His top lane is kind of sketchy. He can beat certain things sometimes, but not really. It seems kind of like anything that is sort of fairly tanky and has any kind of sustain and has a gap closer that just jumps on him and can out trade him early will push him out of lane, and he can't do anything. So he top lane doesn't seem to work too well. Mainly it's a mid lane, and he seems to work best against anything that's kind of slow and more ponderous and is very skill shot reliant. Um, so things I've noticed he did well against like Gragas. Um, I can see him doing well against a Cassiopeia if you're really good at it, although this is a very high skill champion. As far as League of Legends go, like he's one of the more difficult champions to play because he's so squishy. Um, but yeah, you can sometimes take him in the jungle. His initial clear speed is very slow and he gets kind of low, which makes it so dangerous. So if you get counter jungle, you're kind of screwed. Um, you I could see him being taken in the jungle in theory just because it's the safest place for him, so long as, there isn't the counter jungle thing going on and you can just get the farm you need to become powerful. Because the number one key thing, and I probably should have mentioned this first, but the key thing to this character is he seems to have this very definitive threshold where suddenly you go from his crap early game to suddenly you just murder everyone. And it scales actually quite rapidly in the span of about one item. It has largely has to do with I think his the Q scaling on attack speed and the double crit rate thing. Obviously, that stuff's pretty good. So what seems to happen is basically you get one crit item. You get an Infinity Edge, and you're sitting at 50% crit. I like to actually get oftentimes Static Shiv first, and that'll set you at 40% crit. But basically, once you get those two items, Static Shiv and Infinity Edge, just suddenly you're dealing ridiculous damage. It kind of almost pops out of nowhere, and you can basically outduel anyone on the map so long as you're careful and don't screw things up. Uh, it's not a complete jump. Like once you complete that first item, either Infinity Edge or Static Shiv, at that point you can sort of start fighting people on your own terms. Before that, you're very careful to just kind of not die, and it's sort of tricky. It seems it's a lot of laners tend to beat him, and it's a definitive trade-off. Like I can see what Riot's doing here. It's like we're gonna have to give him crap early game, but probably one of the best, if not the best end game in the game, or theoretical best end game. I like to use sort of Baron as a DPS test dummy. If you sit there with a full build on this character and just spam Q, you shred Baron so ridiculously fast. I don't think I've seen any character do it this fast outside of maybe certain things with percent damage or stuff like that. But it's quite potent. You just basically, it kind of feels like you're slogging through the early game and heading for that late game. Kind of like a more extreme version of Master Yi. Actually, his playstyle, the way I like to put it, is sort of a combination between Master Yi, Fiora, and maybe a bit of a Kali or something in there. You kind of get to jump in and you got to blow someone up. You got to do it very carefully. He's one of the squishiest champions I've ever played. So Lifesteal can help a bit, but if you're not careful, again, if you get focused by more than, well, even two people can blow you up instantaneously, depending on who they are, but if you have three people focused on you, you're going to literally die instantly. All the lifesteal in the world is not going to help you in that regard, so you always have to be careful in terms of how you jump in. Again, it's similar to sort of a Kali where you let the fight happen and then suddenly you jump in and you kill everyone. Or if you can segment the fight where you're only fighting a couple people at once, then you can manage sort of thing. I think Riot in one of their posts mentioned how you're supposed to set up the wind wall, so you cut off the back line, you fight the tanks for all, and you will shred tanks, incidentally. Uh, but yeah, Another thing I should mention is he's quite combo intensive. If you screw up your combinations and how many stacks you have on the various abilities and that kind of thing, you're probably going to die. Additional knockups on your team help a lot because his ult doesn't go off unless it has a knockup to go. Not just knockups; they're called airborne, status effect or whatever. So basically, pretty much any knockup counts, and then a couple weird displacements sometimes count. I'm not entirely sure on that one, but I'm sure people will figure that out 100% over time. Another thing I should probably mention is that his AP build sucks. Don't do it. It is very gimmicky. You can make it work. It's actually interesting. On the public test room, they just nerfed his AP ratio from 1.0 on the E to a 0.6, which is strange. It's not that needed a nerf, I don't think. I think what they're doing is taking away some of that ratios just so people aren't tempted to build AP in the first place. It's almost like this trap that's saying, hey, maybe you can build AP. And it's like, no, it can technically work. You just usually don't want to do it. It scales even slower than his AD build, and it just in the end it's still inferior. It can work. It's kind of funny being able to deal like close to 1,000 damage to a single target with an E dash, but it's very much gimmicky, and that's probably why Riot nerfed it. Another thing I was saying much earlier was how it seems like there's a bit too much of a gap between how crappy his early game is and how good his late game is. I was hoping kind of they'd bring that a bit more in line, maybe not quite as extreme because the way he's built, you can't have a good early game on this character consistently because his late game is so good. If his early game was that good, it was good, and his late game is this good, he'd probably be somewhat overpowered. So that's it is needed to an extent. It's just the gap is just so massive. It's quite jarring. So Riot did buff his the base damage on his Q, which might help. I haven't actually tested that out. I'll go test that over the next couple of days. It would be nice if that allows him his early game to suck slightly less. Aside from that, I suspect this is somewhat disappointing because I really like his kit. He's got a really fun kit, but I suspect what's going to end up happening with this champion is not a lot of people are going to end up playing him because he's a melee AD carry, and melee AD carries are so hard to play. They are so positional dependent. They're timing dependent. Again, there's that gear threshold you have to hit, otherwise you just feel useless all game. People are not going to like that. They're probably going to play this character unless he's changed and like those buffs or that one buff I mentioned earlier really changes things around. They're going to play him a couple times and realize, Jesus Christ, I can't click on people and beat them, like a lot of other, sort of no-brain champions can do. And I suspect his popularity may suffer as a result of that. Though you never know. I mean, it's possible he might have a bit of a following. But I suspect he's going to fall under the same trap as Fiora and Master Yi, where you just generally don't see them too much. Aatrox you see a bit more because he's a little bit more forgiving because he has Lifesteal, but that innate Lifesteal thing. But that's a different topic entirely. I should probably get off this. But people also ask me competitively if I think he's going to be competitively used, and that's a very hard question to ask with pretty much any champion, unless there's some something very clear. For example, it was fairly clear when Zac was released that would probably get used competitively, and I've actually found it quite amazing that so many comments saying it looks like Zac sucks, and no, but in any case, it's difficult because again he's melee AD carry and he has such good late game potential in terms of raw damage output, but in a competitive, one thing you do have to keep in mind is competitive scene is almost, they're playing a different game, really. That's why it's hard to kind of gauge these things by us mere mortals. But when something's early game is really weak, really good players will abuse that and abuse that hard and then just completely shut you down. And the other thing is when a team is really coordinated and good in the end game fight, when you're as squishy as this guy is, unless he's really, really careful, like people are just going to focus him down. So it's a very difficult thing. I suspect maybe you might see it every once in a while, kind of like how what's his name, Wicked used Aatrox top lane, and then some of the Europeans sort of started to use him. I never thought that was a particularly safe bet. I think he sort of fell off when people figured out what his deal was. But well, in any case, Yeah, those are really sort of my thoughts on it. Just to sum up, very build him AD, not AP. Uh, take a mid lane probably, maybe sometimes jungle. Extreme cases, maybe top lane. I haven't tried him support. I'm pretty sure he'd be crap if you tried to make him an AD carry. He would get wrecked bottom lane. Uh, Extreme jump in terms of his scaling. He goes from garbage to godless killing machine over the span of 2 items. Um, don't dilute your build too much with defensive stuff because he's never going to get that tanky. His base, like for example, his base AP is garbage. It's one of the lowest I've ever seen. I tried to build him tanky and it's not that great. Early lifesteal can work. I've seen people make it work. It's personally not my bag, but since I've seen people, who are fairly good at mid lane, namely Tsunami X, do it and make it work, it's probably an option. I don't like hitting that threshold thing. I mean, I should kind of an aside on the threshold. Every character seems to have that kind of threshold where suddenly there's a power spike and you notice he's a lot better. Think of Yasuo as the most extreme example of that. But I just kind of want to hammer home this concept that he definitely has this threshold you hit, and it feels frustrating playing him before that, and then suddenly, it's crazy town. But in any case, that's really all I had to say. Hopefully you guys found this somewhat informative. It's pretty early on, so I might learn more about him in the coming weeks or whatever, and he may be changed yet again on the public test realm. So take this all with a grain of salt. But again, those are my thoughts. See you guys around. Goodbye.